So again, thank you so much for joining us today. Little introduction about El Toro and what we do before I introduce our amazing guests, and thank you both so much for being here. So El Toro, we are a nonpartisan entity. We work with local, state, and federal agencies to support their political campaigns. For those of you that weren't able to join our cookieless webinar, definitely check that out on YouTube. But we are focused on cookie-free IP targeting. So basically, we're able to take a physical home address, match that to the IP address, and then send ads to devices seen on that home network. So really cool stuff, and we're cookie free. And those of you that are following, news and updates in the media, cookies are going to be going away soon. So if you're interested in a new alternative to digital advertising, here we are. So our guest of honor today is Cassie Chambers Armstrong. Cassie, your bio is really amazing when I was prepping for this. So Cassie is currently serving as a member of the Louisville Metro Council representing District 8. And Marty right here, who works for El Toro, was her partner in crime, so to speak, working with us in El Toro to help her and support her in her campaign. And we'll hear a little bit about her story shortly. Educational background includes Yale, London School of Economics, Harvard Law School, started from extremely humble beginnings and off doing amazing things now. She's worked in numerous policy environments, including the U.S. State Senate, the U.S. House of Representatives, the U.K. Parliament, and the Kentucky General Assembly. Wow. If you want to learn more about her, check her out. Her website, CassieChambersArmstrong.com. Also, equally impressive, we have Marty Meyer right here, VP of Political and Corporate Outreach with El Toro, has been with El Toro since day one, so one of the OG originals here. He's been involved in literally thousands of political campaigns, helping individuals reach and achieve their goals within the government. Years of experience as a political consultant himself prior to working for El Toro, and has worked in the political sphere as a congressional staffer, and he himself ran for office. So he knows exactly what it takes, and comes from a heavily involved political family. And then me. So as I mentioned, I am Francesca Lubrino. I'm the Director of Product and User Experience here at El Toro. I have a diverse portfolio background of designing and launching enterprise level products, everything from nonprofit to higher education, and now within the digital advertising and data space. So very happy to be here. And after all that, I need to catch my breath. So I'm going to launch our first poll. I'd love to get to know everyone here. So question for everyone is, what brought you to today's webinar? We're going to let that run for a little bit. All right, so we have a good number of folks that are an existing client. Thank you so much for supporting us. Second highest category is looking for new digital solutions. Awesome. I'm going to let this poll go for one more minute so you guys can see the results. All right, we're at 48% participation rate. Can we get a little bit more, a little bit more? All right, I'm going to go ahead and end that poll. Don't worry, I have more polls coming up. I think I click share. There we go. All right. So everyone's background. So looking for new digital solutions. So it's very similar to Cassie's use case, and she's going to talk us through that in a minute. Existing clients. Thank you so much. Some folks curious about El Toro, and then always that other category. All right, Cassie. So I'm going to turn things over to you. So inquiring minds want to know. So just tell us about yourself. What brought you to El Toro and the problem that you were looking to solve?
Sure. So I filed to run for office in December 2019, thinking that I was going to run a traditional campaign at that point. Didn't know that we were about to enter a global pandemic that was going to change the way that folks talk to voters, maybe for forever. I'd always planned on using El Toro and using digital to talk to voters. Believe that, people from my generation, I'm a millennial, it's one of the ways that we talk to each other, and knew that it was going to be part of my political strategy. However, When sort of starting in February, March, April of 2020, 4 months into my campaign, the world started closing down. There were orders that we couldn't go out and knock on doors. We couldn't talk to folks. And so really was looking for a way to make sure that I was getting my message out to voters, that voters knew who I was and what I stood for, quickly and efficiently. And I really ended up pivoting to use El Toro for a lot of my campaign's needs, and really invested a lot of the budget into digital and digital with El Toro.
Awesome. Thanks. So really COVID was kind of that catalyst for you, right? And looking for a different way to work, right? Because the world was changing, norms were changing.
Yeah, so I would say that was sort of what led to all of a sudden being forced into, instead of having digital be a part of the campaign strategy, really being all of the campaign strategy, a very big chunk of the campaign strategy. And of course, it was great that it was effective. It worked. I won a very difficult, very contested primary. And I really think that the ability to talk to voters using El Toro was a big piece of that.
Yeah, and Cassie, if I could jump in, that race was a three-way race. And what percentage of the vote did you bring in?
So it was a three-way race, and I think I got 62% of the vote.
And then if I remember correctly, there were about 39, 40 precincts. And how many of those precincts did you lose?
So I did not lose a single precinct.
Very effective. And I do remember during this time from, discussing with Cassie during the campaign, and then with many other candidates around the country that were experiencing the same thing, where, Cassie had just an awesome ground game. She was knocking on doors every single day throughout the district. But then after that, COVID started, she was getting chased away from doors. And then she pivoted to doing just what we refer to as a lit drop, where she was just, dropping off literature on the doors. But if you remember those early days of the pandemic, when we didn't know if we could spread COVID through, touching paper or something, I remember her calling me and telling me she got chased off of just doing lit drops. So that was a big pivot, I think, point when she moved into, a real full digital campaign.
Yeah. So Marty, oh, go ahead, Cassie.
I was just going to add to that. You remember those were the days very early in the pandemic when people were actually baking their mail, or, like doing all kinds of stuff. They were so worried about, we just didn't have enough information. And so again, forced to sort of do more digital by necessity, but it ended up working out great. I learned a lot more than I had intended to about digital spaces and digital advertising and ways to talk to voters. And I will say, some of those lessons have carried with me into office in terms of sort of how you can use targeted digital to engage folks that you're looking to talk to even after you take office.
Yeah, so that's actually a great segue to my next question. This is for both of you. So how and why do you see political advertising transitioning from more traditional media to more of a digital presence, kind of broad stroke overall?
Let me start with that one, and then Cassie, if you'll finish from your own experience. So, as someone that has been involved in politics my entire life, when Francesca told us earlier that I come from a political family. My father was an alderman before there were council members here in Louisville, and a 5-term state senator. I worked for Congress for 5 years. I actually worked for another council office for 4 years before we started El Toro. But in those times, I kind of come from an old-fashioned political background where it's all direct mail, it's all going to events and shaking hands, and it's all going to knocking on doors. And even in my own campaign in 2010, I had a Facebook page. I didn't actually even do any Facebook advertising. I just had my own page. But now, as we see digital being the #1 medium to target either voters or consumers, it by far has surpassed TV, radio, print, all that. It was just a natural segue. And, with El Toro, since we're able to deliver a ad to a specific physical address as opposed to a area or a cluster, we can augment that. And if you think about those direct mail pieces that politicians have done, those 8.5 by 5.5 glossy mailers, which are the typical that we all get, inundated with in October and November. If you think about the cost of one of those mail pieces, it's going to be anywhere from 50 to 80 cents per person by the time it gets to my house. And like most houses, whoever gets the mail out of the mailbox is the only person to see that for a second, right? So with that same cost, we can target the individual household of that voter, multiple voters, every day for a month for likely the same cost. So we see that type of increase in voter turnout. And real briefly, I think what has made El Toro so effective in this game is not only can we do something that we're saying that everyone else is claiming to do, but we can actually prove it. So in a political campaign, when you give us a voter file, we'll run your list across our system, and we've got over 75% of the entire United States mapped, IP address of the router down to its physical street address. So when we run that, we'll typically match 70 to 90% of your list. And I won't know till I get your list. But once we get that list, we will not say we have a match of IP to address without a very high degree of confidence, 95% or higher across the data that we're constantly adjusting. But what makes us different from every other platform out there, the Googles, the Facebooks, et cetera, is if you give them a voter file, they're just going to come back and say, hey, we mapped 80%, 85%. El Toro will actually send that list back to you with a new column with the true or false in front of each record. So we disclose who we can target and serve ads to and who we can't serve ads to. So when we do a campaign for Cassie with that get out the vote message, vote for Cassie for Metro Council, after the election is over, after they update the voter files that you're using with who turned out the vote, because we don't know how you vote, but we do know if you voted. You can pull a list of everybody in that district who voted in that cycle. We can do a matchback analysis and show you empirically how that targeted group turned out the vote compared to that control group of people on your list that we weren't able to serve those ads every day to, right? We are consistently showing a 8 to 15% in voter turnout. And that is just a game changer. Because in politics nowadays, winning by 2, 3, 5% is huge. We actually worked in a campaign a few months ago, a special election in Miami, a very high density population where our candidate won by 5 votes. And so never say your vote doesn't count.
Yeah,
and
so
Cassie,
it's not only.
go
ahead.
sorry, go ahead, Frankie. Cassie, do you want to add to that, or I'll shut up?
So I can add just a little bit about why, from my perspective as a former candidate, as an elected official, I think digital really is the way to go to talk to people. I think about, sort of when I'm most likely to go and try to learn more about something I see that piques my interest. And like Marty said, a lot of times, my mail sometimes will sit in the mailbox for several days. It'll sit on my kitchen counter. Eventually I'll sort of be like, well, I pulled out the bills, and anything that at this point I haven't opened is probably non-urgent and it's going in the trash. It might go in the trash before I even look at it, through recycling actually, but very quickly get rid of it. Because usually if I'm going through the mail, I don't really have time to sort of sit and go down any rabbit holes. In contrast, if I'm, served a digital ad, and maybe I know that there's an election going on, it's getting close to the election, it says, election day, early voting starts tomorrow, learn more. If I'm just sitting in front of my laptop, hanging out, reading the newspaper, I might click on that ad and I might go to that web page and I might sort of go down the rabbit hole of getting to know that candidate and informing myself as a voter. And so I think it's just sort of become the way that we connect with each other, sort of on our own time and in our own way. And one thing I've noticed, even before I ran for office, I would go out, volunteer with campaigns, knock a lot of doors. It's a lot harder to reach voters at their doors than it used to be. I think maybe it's the pandemic and sort of not connecting with each other for a couple of years in the same ways, getting more sort of in our bubbles. But people just, they don't seem to answer their doors as much, or if they do, they might be, a little more likely to just be like, okay, give me your literature, but they're, they're not really interested in standing there and sort of having in-depth conversations the way that maybe they were in the past. And so I think that means that talking to people on their own time in the way that they want to be talked to a lot of times is going to be through digital means.
Yeah, definitely. So it sounds like not only the targeting affordance that we spoke about earlier, but just, the method of delivery, how it's better integrated into our lives, and then all the analytics that you could run afterwards, that matchback process, which you can't really do with a postcard, right? So lots of different affordances that digital adds.
And I think everyone that's running for office knows how hard it is to ask friends and family for money. I mean, that's what it takes to run. And you want to be a good steward of that money. And I do think that having analytics and metrics is really important, because there's so many things, especially in smaller races for council, for state house, for state senate, you just don't have a lot of metrics and you don't really know how things are going. And so the fact that El Toro can give you analytics on different campaigns is information, and that's really valuable.
That's a great point, Cassie. Yeah. So folks, we want to hear from you about your advertising strategy. So I have another poll that I'm going to launch. So for folks out there, what % of your media is now digital versus traditional outreach? So we have that poll going. I see lots of folks embracing the digital. We have a tie between 40% and 80% digital. A couple of people doing 100% digital. Very interesting. Marty, what do you think about these numbers coming and how folks are responding?
I think it, kind of tells me what I think. You've got a wide variety of people using digital and political campaigns. And a lot of these are folks like Cassie who are making the decisions for her campaign. A lot of campaigns have got consultants and campaign managers or big consultancy groups that have got a whole basket of tools that they're using, whether that is direct mail, political, digital, or radio, that type of thing. And some people are old fashioned, some of the, some folks they've always done direct mail. So that's what they do. So as I said, as digital has taken over and as the consumer has demanded more accountability with their digital, which is what El Toro uniquely provides, since we are the only one that does tell you who we can and can't, target. And that's really, no one else does that. I'll see these, if we did this poll a year from now and then 2 years from now, I think we constantly see that shift to really be the 60 to 80%. You never put all your eggs in one basket, though. You're going to do some direct mail. You're going to do some door knocks. You may do radio and TV in certain types of markets, but obviously that digital is growing so fast.
Yeah, definitely. So as we see the trends out, in our small sample size and also the changes in our culture and the market, Marty and Cassie, how do you feel that El Toro is able to meet these changing demands of more of a request, or really sounds like a requirement of starting to go digital with your campaign?
So
I'll let Marty go first on that one.
So obviously, like I just said, Frankie, I think it's the just the technology, and with a I'm an older guy, right? I'm 58. I got my first computer when I was in 1994, when I was 31 years of age. Okay, my kids have always known computers. My granddaughter, who's 6 years old, uses computers. She's always known that. But even my 83-year-old mother uses the computer to stay connected because of her mobility issues, right? So it's just that constant growing force. It just makes sense. And since you really want to have that type of granularity, like if you think about, we're in Louisville, Kentucky, and if you do a TV buy in Louisville, you're going to be serving 60% or more of that message outside of Louisville. It's going to go across the river to Indiana, the surrounding counties, and it doesn't know if it's seeing a Republican or a Democrat or a person under 18 that can't vote or someone that just doesn't vote. So, those demands are there, and, we're filling that need.
Cassie, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, I think Marty really summarized a lot of sort of what makes El Toro unique and what makes El Toro great at, doing what y'all do. I will just say, I know a lot of folks who have used El Toro, and everyone has always been really impressed with sort of the responsiveness, like the customer service, the accountability, the metrics, the sort of hand holding and talking through the metrics, which for those of us running for office, so a lot of times we're doing so, particularly because we aren't math people or numbers people. And so, it's really, I think all of those things really contribute to how El Toro has become like a household name, certainly here in the city of Louisville. And I can't imagine that it's sort of limited just to this area. I know that folks all over America are talking about y'all's product.
And it might be good too to talk about some specific strategies, because as I said, we have the ability that granularity to get down to the individual voter household. So, Cassie could give me a list of all of, in a Democratic primary, she could give me the list of all the Democrats in her district that are in her universe she wants to target, and we could hit them with a message that says, hey, vote for Cassie Armstrong for Metro Council, and everyone's getting that, right? But it's kind of generic, it doesn't, doesn't wow me, right? But there are other things that we've seen, and one of the first people we actually did this new strategy on was with Cassie. She really used our tools fully, as opposed to generically. So like when we started out on an early campaign, our timing here in Kentucky is the filing deadline is around mid-January. The primary is typically in the end of July or May, I'm sorry. So Cassie actually started a small campaign. We called it an influencer campaign, where we looked at influencers in the district. Okay, so the neighborhood association groups that are very active in a council race, we looked up those names of those elected board members and we put them on a list. We looked up people that were known to be donors and to people of her party in that area. We looked up other influencers, business owners, heads of unions who she was asking for their labor endorsements. And we started serving these digital ads early to these folks, like, way before the filing deadline. Nobody's doing media buys in December and January for a race in November, but most people don't understand how digital works. When you go to a web page, there's an auction that happens on your computer to put an ad in front of you. Most people think that if you go to CNN or Fox News and see a banner ad, everybody's seeing that ad. Nothing could be farther from the truth. So by hitting these influencers who are going to bring on, donations, influence people to give you endorsements, to get other people to vote, that's key. So we can do that at very small amounts of money. And then, Cassie, when she first started, she was so impressive in a race because she started knocking on doors on January 7th with a personal commitment to knock on 100 doors a day. So we could take a voter file of the precinct she was walking and hit him with, hey, I'll be in your neighborhood this week to ask for your support. Let us, hope we get to meet, right? So it kind of softens that door knock, starts building that name ID. And then when we target in the Get Out the Vote campaign, where everybody spends the bulk of their money, right? We, instead of just doing the whole district with that Vote for Cassie, in her district, she's got about 6 or 7 neighborhoods. Every city's got neighborhoods, right? Every county's got cities. Every state has counties. So we can set up small campaigns where she would pull a list of like, senior citizens or women or African Americans from a specific neighborhood or city. And we can say, hey, Cassie will fight for women in Tyler Park. Cassie will fight for seniors in Tyler Park. That's not going to cost you as a campaign any more money, because if we serve, 50,000 addresses, 1 or 2 ads a day for 30 days, or if you gave me 5 lists of 10,000 with that same frequency, we are going to, it costs you the same amount of money. So you can get better use by getting really granular with the same granularity as a direct mail piece, which we already talked about, is too expensive.
Yeah.
You can't serve a mail piece every day, right?
Yeah, so actually, Marty, there's a question in our question log that kind of goes with the theme of this multi-campaign approach. Questions from Tony. How many voters did Cassie serve El Toro ads to? How many times a day did she send them ads, and for how many days?
Cassie, I'll start this, but I know that we served a lot of different groups early on. They were small groups, but once we started that GOTV effort, I want to say we were doing about a 6-week campaign, maybe 8 weeks. And it was like 1 to 2 ads per day over the time. But I work in a lot of campaigns, so I don't.
Yeah, I don't remember exactly how many, but I remember sort of the goal heading into, part of this too, and part of what's great about El Toro is it can be really nimble, because if folks think back to spring of 2020, what happened in Kentucky and what happened in most states, I think, is our primary got moved because we were suddenly doing mail-in ballots. We were doing this combo with like some in-person early voting, but sort of things were constantly changing. And so I remember we were adjusting in real time what the messaging was of telling folks this is how you vote, and also setting the timeline, because we didn't really know for a while exactly when people were going to be voting. And so it was like, okay, let's do a 6-week campaign. No, let's, and I remember having some conversations about, based on the budget, how to be serving those ads and who to be serving them to, and sort of the time frame, which I think is really good, because elections do change, hopefully not in the same way that COVID caused them to change, but there are things on the ground that often are going to influence who you want to talk to, and when you're talking to them and what you're saying to them, and sort of how often you're trying to talk to them. And so I think having, again, it's very different than, if you put a mailer in the mail and something changes, or the messaging changes, or something happens politically, once that leaves the printer and is at the mail house, you really can't do much about it. I myself, I'm sure other people have seen this, have been given mailers with like voting information that's arrived after like early voting has ended, or something like that. Yeah. Or it's like wrong, or like you'll see a typo or something that, again, I did send some traditional mail, and I expect that I would send some traditional mail in the future, because it's always good to sort of use different buckets. But it's just, it's not as nimble, it's not as responsive, it doesn't have a lot of the advantages that digital has.
Yeah, and relate to that timing factor. And Marty, I'm sure you could speak to this more, but El Toro, we do offer same day priority turnaround, and we are able to serve ads up until the point of the election.
And I did want to say something about the campaigns. The ones that I found I got the most like on the ground feedback from folks on were those ones that in advance of showing up and knocking doors, it would say like, hey, I'm going to be in your neighborhood on this day. So often I would have people who would then they meet me at the doors, or they would know that I'd been there or whatever, see me out and about later, and they would be like, oh, yeah, I saw that you were going to be there. I'm so glad I caught you, and so that one I think really did stick with folks, because again, you see that someone who's running for office is going to be stopping by. You're like, oh, great. I'm looking forward to seeing them. Or you think, I'm definitely locking my door, not answering it. I guess it just depends.
Yeah. So Cassie, we explored some of your needs this political cycle that you had. It was about figuring out a new strategy to engage with your community during COVID, really forming new community bonds, maybe in places that you hadn't had a chance to connect with yet. So folks, we have another poll for you along this similar vein. So want to know everyone's biggest needs this political cycle. Is it around fundraising? Is it around get out the vote, ballot initiatives, or other? And if you do select other, I'd love to see some of those pop up in the chat. So currently fundraising seems to be the highest need. And GOTV. And Cassie, what do you think about how the numbers are coming in on this poll so far? Does that resonate with you?
Yeah, so I can't see the numbers. I don't have quite the same permissions that y'all do, so I can't see them come
Okay.
in real time. But I will say, I think for candidates, like fundraising is always the thing that, you know, it's tough, it's increasingly expensive. So it doesn't surprise me that that would be something that folks were saying that they would need help with. And we know that digital is an effective way to, I mean, I think sometimes candidates, we think like, oh, contacting people for fundraising, it just feels, you know, there's sort of like maybe like an icky feeling to it. But really, like when someone invests their money in your campaign, that means they believe in you. That means they believe in like what you're trying to do. That believes in, they believe in the platform. And so, you know, I think about connecting with voters for fundraising really as sort of the end point of telling them the story about who you are and why you're seeking the position that you are. Or if you're doing a ballot initiative, sort of, you know, what the cause is that you care about and why it's important.
Yeah.
And this might be a good time to kind of talk about fundraising as well. You know, we do, you know, I would say most of the work we do is the get out the vote campaign. You know, we want to put that name in front of that person that's going to be on the ballot come election day or early voting day, right? And we just want that name to be kind of burned into your retina so that when you get this ballot, you're thinking, hey, I know this person, right? And, you know, that's great. But with fundraising, you know, there's no magic bullets first, okay? If you pulled a list of, you know, Cassie, you know, as a Democratic representative in Louisville, if she pulled a list of just Fidelity Democrats in her district and served an ad that said, hey, give me some money, right, for my next election, she's probably not going to get a lot back from that. You know, supporters, friends, family, yes. But typically what I see is when we use you know, when we layer on digital campaigns during a fundraising event. So if Cassie has a fundraiser, and she's going to have a host, a co-host, a friend of the campaign, all those different levels of giving. And we're going to ask those folks that are part of this support team to give us addresses to target people that they want to ask, those friends and neighbors and colleagues. So we can layer that on there. And, you know, as Cassie's making phone calls to collect money, as other friends are calling these people to come to this event, we can see how effective by getting that message, building that familiarity works. And what's nice about a fundraiser campaign with us, unlike a matchback analysis in elections, where you may need to wait a month, 2-3 months for the voter files to get updated from who turned out. With a fundraising campaign, you're going to have the address of the donor and the dollar amount. So we're immediately able to do a matchback analysis. And what we do consistently show are the people that we're targeting with these extra ads are definitely more responsive to writing checks. But another benefit that we've seen when we write these, when we do these matchbacks, are the people that are actually writing checks that are seeing the ads, the conversions. Their checks are typically 10 to 15% more than the control group of people that we weren't serving. And we do a lot of political fundraising. We do a lot of nonprofit fundraising too, and we see those same results. But that's one scenario for, you know, augmenting the success of your fundraising efforts. Okay.
Yeah.
The other thing that we've done, and we've seen this more on a grand scale, is kind of playing on emotions. Okay. So if there are events that are going on around the country that are getting people's attention, we can target that base with an information. There's just so many opportunities there. It just depends on what you're trying to accomplish, where these people who actually show the hell up, you know, if they're going to go to something, go to an event, go to a rally, typically these are going to, people are going to vote and they're going to open their checkbooks up for the causes and candidates that they hold dear.
Yeah. So Marty, one interesting question that is coming to mind as I hear you talking about all this, you know, targeting capability. I'm a candidate. This sounds phenomenal. I'm running for a really small seat. I don't have a lot of resources. I don't really have a list of people, right? What products can El Toro provide or help me get started if I'm not really coming to the table with a whole lot other than, myself and my brand and my goals?
I think that's what's unique about us is we can work on very small budgets, and I could work on a presidential race with hundreds of millions of dollars down to $2,000, right? So if, our one-to-one targeting, that's our core capability. That's what we started out with before we invented these other technologies and products. But, one-to-one targeting in politics is great. You know who your voter is, right? If you're in a closed primary, you only want to target your party, right? Or maybe you want to target just a message to a specific demographic like women or African Americans or Latinos or whatever. So since these are your voters, let's go after them. And in some voters, like, people like me, I've never missed an election in my life, and I'm 58. Okay. So, I'm going to vote in a primary, where a lot of people just vote in the general election or the presidential general election or the important ones, right? So you come with that group. We just start building your name ID to get those people out to the polling location. And, and we can work with that budget. It's just, you're going to be much more effective because it's the least expensive way to do things. And it is the most targeted. Now, there are some other, there's lots of digital platforms, right? Google, Facebook are the big ones, right? But none of these companies can target down to the household because they don't tell you who they can and can't target. It may be demographics or based on cookies, lots of changes to the cookie world. So we can still stand by that and, take your dollar much, much further.
Yeah, so it's not only the type of targeting we could do and the guaranteed accuracy with that, but it's also merging that with the different data sources and audience opportunities that we have, things like L2 files, right? Augmenting voter data, some of our core products like digital canvassing, venue replay to understand where folks are out in time and space and forming campaigns around that. All right, so starting to wrap things up. I have one more question. Just a reminder, folks, if you want to ask us anything, put that question in the Q&A log. I'll be addressing those next. So as we wrap this up, Cassie and Marty, my last formal question to you both, what are your political best practice recommendations? Again, if anyone is out there maybe looking to revamp their advertising strategy or looking to get started, what are those core tips that you would recommend to someone?
Cassie, why don't you start on that?
Yeah. So I think that particularly for newer candidates who haven't done this a lot, really the best thing you can do is talk to other people who have run about what's been successful for them. I know that whenever I was getting started, that's what I did. I think being here and hearing about El Toro is a great way to sort of be talking to people about that. But I really think that there's a lot that you don't even know that you don't know when you start off running for office. And so being thoughtful at the outset to learn from people, to figure out how to map out a strategy. I think it's very easy to get into this, you have a set amount of money, and then all of a sudden you're sort of spending it haphazardly on things that feel like they're popping up. And so taking the time to really think strategically about how am I going to talk to voters? You should spend your money actually talking to voters. That's really, the core of a good campaign is putting your resources into reaching actual voters. And so taking the time to sort of map out what your budget is, how you're going to spend it, and make sure that you're getting feedback from folks who have gone through the process before is the advice that I would give to anyone running for office.
And, and just to kind of, segment on that, I would recommend talking to people in the political world. Like I said, I kind of grew up in this. I understand what you do to get elected. and it takes a lot of work. Just ask Cassie, she'll tell you. But and it takes a lot of work once you get elected too. But I recommend reaching out to those friends that had been in the political process. Okay. I always, caution people when they're talking to experts, those political consultants out there, to really understand what they're doing, what they're, asking to do, because you need to kind of be in control of what you decide for your campaign. You have to kind of, be careful of those purse strings, because people will find ways to spend your money. I really recommend, if anyone's running for a campaign, or they're a campaign consultant or a digital consultant, or a media company, to reach out to us. We can get really deep into these different strategies that we've just kind of touched upon today.
That's awesome. And I actually have some results written down this piece of paper that I'm going to read out. These are some interesting insights that we've seen. We have several white papers and case studies on our website, specifically around the political domain regarding advertising strategy. But just to read some of these off, some best practice recommendations. So for creative types, the type of media that you should be serving, 12.5% more likely to win a race using a combination of both banner and video, or OTT, which is over the top advertising. For time frame, so how long your advertising campaign should run, 20.2% more likely to win when running initiatives for at least 26 days. So that's a good benchmark as you're looking at your budget and thinking what you can support. For frequency, this is how often the ad should be shown to the individual. For best practice recommendation, 15.8% more likely to win when displaying that ad at least 40 times to each target. That's an interesting metric, that saturation point, right? How long it takes for that candidate's name to sink in and get sticky. And then finally, coverage rate, 17.7% more likely to win if you target at least 25% of the votes for that office in the previous election. So again, these are available on our website. We have some really great case studies and white papers that we've produced. Marty, kind of related to some of those statistics that I was just relaying regarding frequency, a question came in from the chat. How many impressions do you recommend per unique voter for a successful political campaign?
So really, I mean, the stats you said, those stats come from actual analysis of thousands of individual campaigns across our platform, okay, based upon the win rates, the number, the time and so forth. But as a rule of thumb, first off, when you're doing a get out the vote campaign, whatever your budget is, work your way backwards from election day. Once you go up, you don't want to stop. It's a really bad idea to do like a campaign for a week and then pause for a week and then do a week and then pause for a week, because you're really just wasting all that influence that you're getting. So if you can afford a 2-week campaign, a 3-week campaign, an 8-week campaign, based upon the frequency you want to do, that's what you want to do, and not go, not stop until election afternoon. Okay. Secondly, 1 to 3 impressions per day are a good rate of return. Okay. If you're just in one impression a day, that's great. But, knowing that if I'm doing a 30-day campaign, 30 impressions to that household, my wife and I are our household. So we're going to see those ads multiple times, and that's going to have an influence. Obviously, if we're doing 2 or 3 times a day, we're going to see that name more often, and we're going to, get better results. But like I said, we can do this on a 1 impression a day for 2 weeks, or better, 3 impressions a day for 12 weeks. It's just, you have to look at what the reality is of your fundraising capabilities and so forth.
Yeah. Before we wrap up for today, Marty, I'd like for you to go over our, and this is really a unique factor, I think, of what makes us a true differentiator within the market. Can you explain to folks our political guarantee?
Yes, absolutely. And that's something that really kind of sets us apart. As you know, no one gives guarantees in political advertising for the most part, right? And they certainly don't give guarantees in politics, but we do. And what we've done, based on that matchback analysis, where we show that 8 to 15% typical lift on voter turnout, we actually started offering back in 2018 a guarantee on political races. if we don't show a minimal lift of 5% in voter turnout, which is huge, and I can, quote many instances, and Donald Trump can tell you he lost by 5%, right? But if we don't show a 5% lift in voter turnout between the targeted group, we will refund your campaign half the money you spent with us. And so we obviously stand behind what we do. No one else can do that because they don't tell you who. It's all about these cookie profiles and whatnot, right? So we can do it. And it always interested in me because I kind of came on as the political guy in this company. All my partners are just Einstein tech guys who built this, right? They know how the internet works. I'll never know how the internet works, right? But I've learned so much, and how it just seems how dirty sometimes this, digital can be, because we know that the majority of ads that are being served are triggered by a web bot as opposed to a human being. There's billions of bots operating on the internet in this country collecting data for somebody, and there's only a couple 100 million actual users. So really 70 to 80% of all ad calls that people are paying for are seen by a bot, never a human being. And that's huge. And if these companies can tell you that, hey, we mapped 75%, 80, 85%, why can't they tell you who they match and who they didn't match? It just makes me wonder.
Yeah. All right, everyone. Marty and Cassie, thank you so much for your time. I learned a lot and I helped prep for this webinar. So hopefully folks out there learned a lot too. I'm going to go ahead and share our closing slides. Again, thank you everyone so much for your time today. If you're ready to run with the bulls, pew pew, check us out, eltoro.com/political. Thank you all for your time. Have a lovely Friday. If I remember correctly, I think everyone had sunny weather today. And we will talk with everyone soon.